My name is Kayla Haraway, and I will be talking to you today about how violent video games impact society and may be a factor in producing real world violence.
Hey, my name is Wyatt Murray. I'll be joining Miss Haraway in this debate on violent video games in creating real world violence.
So, in 1976, Death Race was released to the public as a game where you had to drive with your feet and your hands using real world driving controllers to kill as many pedestrians as you can. So, we're going to quickly show you a video here talking about this game and its release to the public.
All right.
In 1976, video game company Exidy released a game called Death Race. To play it, you put your hands on an actual steering wheel, your foot's on a pedal. You drive around a car and murder anything in your way. You hear the screams of your victims, and their gravestones litter the screen. Soon after its release, there were calls to ban it. There was outrage, and many were worried about what it was doing to their kids.
All right.
So, with this game's release, there was widespread outrage based on the violent nature that it portrayed. Dr. Bird Meeks, a Seattle psychiatrist, tells a local newspaper of how this game appeals to the morbid curiosity in people to act on their desires. This was the first widespread outrage from parents who felt the violent nature was corrupting their children, causing them to skip school, steal money to play these games. It was very scary.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Kayla, for referencing Dr. Bert Meeks and their study. I'd actually like to take this opportune moment to discuss why psychology and specifically stuff like this faces significant challenges in replicating its findings. I first felt bad about this study because it had such a small amount of people to go in as use as sample size, and so I actually started looking into the replication crisis that psychology has been under as of late. Um, uh, so this field often exhibits overconfidence in its research design, which can, as seen here, there are multiple points for it. Most of this information that was gathered using a fairly limited metric of measurement, and so the sophistication of it was not very well documented, and the openness of the design that they used meant that they were more just pulling abstractions from their results rather than having statistical data to directly correlate those results with information. Um, given psychology's widespread influence already, statements that are poorly backed up can provoke unnecessary fear and create more and more anxiety amongst parents and the public at large.
With that, I would like to point out that I did find a study done in 2000 on 210 college students that showed even a brief exposure to violent video games can increase aggressive behavior and violent leniency in people. In this study, students were either playing Wolfenstein 3D, which was a violent game, or Myst, a non-violent game. And with that, they were studied on who was to punish their opponent for a longer period of time at the end of playing these two games. The students who played Wolfenstein showed more likeliness to punish their opponent for longer, and those who did not play the violent video game were more lenient to punishing their opponent, if at all.
All right. Thank you. I believe this study does tend to fall short in drawing conclusive results, though, after review, as it may unintentionally reinforce a misconception that violent video games increase aggression. I'd like to bring up a study by Oxford's Journal of Communication, where they talk about how media violence in general predicts, or of its ability to predict societal violence. This topic specifically talks about both media in general and in video games, with a core focus being that video games are examined within the last 20 years. Specifically, if I look at my notes here, the rates that they have stated here is that results of this study conclude that Societal consumption of media violence is not predicative of increased societal violence rates. And as a result, I'd like to also point back to our psychology study before, where I mentioned that the small scope of this study relieves it to be unreliable in terms of a larger, more replicatable analysis. I believe, yes. All right, up to you.
I can see your point in that, and so my rebuttal would be, what about real world situations? So, sometime in 2019, there was a large massacre in Texas and Ohio, which left almost 30 people dead. The president at that time, Donald Trump, cites that video games as one of the reasons behind the mass shootings. In one of his speeches to the public, he says, and I quote, "It is too easy today for troubled youth to surround themselves with a culture that celebrates violence, including the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace." And with that, one of his other senators, McCarthy, a California Republican, agrees and says that video games dehumanize individuals to make it more acceptable, and this is a problem for future generations. He goes on to state that if you investigate the photos of how these mass shootings took place, you can see the similarities in the video games that these shooters play. So drawing a conclusion with that would be the video games are inciting people to make these violent behaviors reality.
Wow. Respectfully, I would like to disagree with a lot of our politicians who tend to blame video games for violent crime. They often point to a culture of violence in video games as a scapegoat for societal issues like gun violence, but I feel that there is more to the information than just that. So I'd like to bring up a societal study on violent video games and violent crime by Wiley, by the online library, specifically Wiley's University, which suggests a surprising trend where there is a potential correlation between violent video games and lower crime rates. I believe that there might be greater issues at play, and our politicians simply regurgitate this fear.
That's a good point. To sum it up, society often wants something to blame for nonsensical violence and hate crimes. Video games seem to be an easy target for this when bad things happen. But in the same token, when people are exposed to certain types or themes in media, it can have an effect on you if you are a violent by nature individual. People who commit these crimes usually dig the grave for video games to be blamed by talking about them during their interviews and such as well. And parents have always worried about something new and misunderstanding warping their children's minds for years and years to come. All we can do is make good choices and keep moving forward. Thank you for listening, and my name is Kayla Haraway.
Thank you. To summarize my points, numerous studies consistently show that video game violence doesn't cause increased youth aggression and violence. And in fact, some studies have been pointing towards a decrease in aggression and violence in amongst youth. So despite sensationalist news reporting suggesting otherwise, video games shouldn't be used as a scapegoat for broader societal issues. It's essential for us as adults to teach our youth the value of human life and empathy, and ensure the content that we and our children engage with promotes health and safety as a shared responsibility. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great night.